All in Sports Network. We love sports.
Another week. It is Tuesday. It is September 10th, 2024. This is All In Horns. I'm Tanner Carlson along with Jake Jimerson on Rogue Sports Network. And we are just going to be talking more Michigan and kind of where Texas is right now. And I think Texas is in a really great spot with a lot of young players. And one thing that we want to hone in on is the production that we're getting from a guy like Collin Simmons. And guys like David Benda and Anthony Hill and, just what this defense has looked like to start this show off early. We want to dive more into that Michigan game. I know everyone's still riding high about it. I know it's still kind of the talk of the country right now. The performance that Texas gave to Michigan. And Jake, I want to know kind of now that the leaves have kind of settled a little bit and things are starting to die down, blood pressures are going down a little bit, cooler heads are prevailing, if you will. What is your assessment following the weekend now that we've gotten into next week? And yes, it is UTSA week. We don't want to overlook that. However, we still have some things to talk about to finish up and put a bow on the Michigan talk.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there was a lot of excitement on our end after the game on Saturday, and now having had some time to give it another look and kind of calm down, as Sark, talked about in his presser, and we'll talk about later, there's a lot of good from that game. There's a lot of great things to love, but there's also going to be some coachable moments out of that game for the coaching staff, and I think complacency hopefully is not going to be an issue with this team. I know Sark, one thing he said today was he immediately put on the Notre Dame film today for the team and showed them this is what happens when you get too high after a big win. They won at A&M. That's not quite the same feat as beating Michigan at Michigan, but still a big win for Notre Dame in that program. And then they lose at home to Northern Illinois in a shocker where they were 35-point favorites, which Texas is 35-point favorites this weekend. And so I think Sark is just trying to early on make sure this team doesn't get complacent, as you're mentioning, because you don't want to overlook a UTSA and have a Wyoming type performance.
Well, Texas is now the number 2 team in the country with the new polls coming out. And anything on that top 25 list kind of surprise you a little bit? For me, honestly, it was just the team you were just talking about, Northern Illinois getting the number 25 spot. And I just think, it's an interesting perspective on things. But, Michigan down to 17, and they should have a fairly, reasonable game come Saturday. I would think that they got a little bit of revenge on their minds. But Texas now moved to the number 2 spot in the country, and it is Georgia, Texas, Ohio State, and then 7 of the top 10 are SEC teams. And 6 of the top 7 are SEC teams. Jake, other than that, and kind of the top-heavy conference, and that is the Southeastern Conference, what else stands out to you?
Yeah, I mean, just to touch on, you brought up Northern Illinois, and we just talked about their big win, but they got to be the leader to be that 12 seed right now in the playoffs. I mean,
yeah,
they're definitely worth talking about. They are the favorite that no one was talking about in the preseason.
Yeah, and that is the biggest. That is going to be the biggest non-Power 5 win of the season, regardless of who you look at this year. That is going to be the number 1 win,
and regardless of how Notre Dame ends up as well.
Sure, yes,
winning at Notre Dame for a program like them is huge, regardless of what people want to say about Notre Dame and having a tendency to lose that type of game. I believe it was their first Power 5 win, or it was their first like top 10 ranked win or something like that.
It was, I believe it was their first win over a ranked opponent in program history. I know that sounds crazy, but I think it was something along those lines. I read the same thing you did. Yeah.
And so that jumps out, Nebraska being back in the rankings, and I would say deserved with their first 2 performances. Sure. That kind of stands out, a program like a Miami who's in the top 10 starting to come back. But I wanted to talk about Oregon real quick.
Dang it. Yeah, you got it from me, man. You got
it. What are we doing here? What are they doing in the top 10? Why are they in the top 10 and USC is number 11?
No, USC has looked worlds better than Oregon. But yeah, I think now, okay, so here's a quick conversation, and Jake, I don't want to spend too much time on it because we do have a jam-packed show today, and I don't want to get too far off the rails, but I think here's been my take for always and forever will be. Rankings should not come out until week 4. You should not have your first rankings until week 4. And I know why they do it. They do it for the Texas-Michigan games. Top 10 matchups, they can sell it easily. However, to be completely honest with you, man, are you not going to be able to sell Texas-Michigan regardless? Are you not going to be able to sell these big school games regardless of what their ranks are? If it's Miami and Oregon playing against each other and, people are going to tune into that regardless of what their rankings say they are going into the season. And I think it does set up for a lot of misconception later on in the year whenever, say, a Michigan is unranked. People are going to dog on the Texas win. Say A&M is unranked. No one's going to really give credit to the Notre Dame win over A&M. And so it's just going to be one of those things that I don't know. It doesn't pay a whole lot of dividends at the time, I guess, until you look at the final rankings. And then you can go back at the season sometimes and you're like, wow, Texas beat an unranked Oklahoma State team that finished number 10 in the country. So I don't know. It kind of plays in its hand back and forth. But I always think, like, why would you shouldn't come out with the rankings until about week 4. That's when you got a good grasp as to where the top 25 is.
Here would be my best devil's advocate argument towards that, to not just agree with you and go on for another minute, is how about you still do rankings in the preseason and in these first weeks, but you're held to some type of standard to where you are willing to make dramatic swings. So for instance, when an Oregon looks like they have the first 2 weeks, they should be 15th.
They should be in the 20s.
I mean,
no, they should be in the 20s. Oregon has looked bad. Now, I'm not saying Boise State doesn't necessarily, they're not a competent program because the running back is probably the top Heisman candidate right now.
37 points at home by Oregon against a team who just gave up 45 to Georgia Southern is embarrassing, especially with as much talent as they have. And like, what's an Oklahoma doing at 15? No offense to my Sooner fans, but you guys know that product on the field these first 2 weeks does not look like a top 15 team. Not saying they can't get there this year. I know they have a ton of injuries right now. They're down to like their 4th or 5th center. 4 of their 5 linemen are hurt. 3 of their starting 5 wide receivers are hurt. I get that. But as of right now, at this point in the season, a lot of these rankings just don't reflect what you're going to see at the end.
Yep. Yeah. And okay. So I will give you that. Like if the voting committee, the AP polling committee is going to have, polls in the first 3-4 weeks of the season, which they're not going away. They generate too much talk like what we're doing right now. But I think what it is I would like to see that. Say a Michigan does look really bad after a couple weeks, but they have won those 2 games but they still haven't looked great. Maybe they were ranked number 5 to start the year. Put them at 22. Who cares? Like, make sure that the rankings reflect on what these teams actually look like going into conference play.
Yeah, agreed 100%.
Well, I took it from you, so I would hope so. All right, so let's go ahead and let's jump in. It is UTSA week, Jake. Let's avoid a Wyoming-like performance like we did last year. Go out and look like a national title contender every single week. Quinn Ewers was SEC Offensive Player of the Week. Jake Majors, SEC offensive lineman of the week. What do those mean anything to you? I mean, I think it kind of stands out already. Texas already has 2 co-offensive line players of the week in the SEC through 2 weeks of play with probably and arguably the best offensive line in football.
Yeah, I mean, it's not anything I'm going to be throwing in my Twitter bio or, I'll retweet it and I'll, be like, hey, Longhorns did good this week. But I do think it is a showing of the talent build up at offensive line and the development. For 3 years ago when Sarkisian took over the program, getting embarrassed because of the trenches against a weaker SEC team, to now being in the SEC, having offensive linemen that are standing out as the best offensive linemen in the SEC. I do think it's a testament to the program building that Sarkisian has done at Texas so far.
What I like is, I think a lot of people have talked about Texas's speed, especially going into that Michigan game. The big mismatch is the speed. The big mismatch is on the outside. Where Texas really dominated Michigan was in the trenches, defensively and offensively. Texas was able to establish the run game and the middle of that offensive line. Your big thing was that interior offensive line can not only they create separation for the running backs to run through those holes, but can they also protect Quinn in the pocket and not have that pocket collapse internally? And they did exactly that. I mean, they showed why they should be considered the best offensive line in the country. And then the defensive line did the same thing. So as everyone's talking about the speed and this, that, and the other, Texas kind of have just created this identity that, yeah, we might look flashy on the outside, but we've got power on the inside of our offense and our defense. And we've got some strength there, and we're willing to go head to head with anybody in the country with it.
Yeah, I mean, they literally forced Michigan to stop blitzing.
Yeah.
Almost all of Michigan's blitzing was in the first half. Michigan they were still keeping enough defenders in the box to defend the run, but they were not trying to blitz to put pressure on the quarterback anymore because the offensive linemen and the running backs, which we thought this would be a game where you'd feel the loss of CJ Baxter, especially in pass pro, and that just wasn't the case. You had some busts by the running backs in the red zone with going the wrong way on a couple plays, but other than that, the running backs were fantastic as well, which also is involved in winning the line of scrimmage because of that ability to be that extra layer of protection in pass pro. But the offensive line, to me, that's about as perfect as a game as I could imagine them playing against that level of a front. Not only I kind of expected the tackles to do as well as they did, but like you said, and I've preached it for years between you and I before this podcast ever existed. It's all about the interior offensive line because interior pressure on the quarterback will ruin a quarterback's day. And then not being able to block in the interior will blow up your run game. If your interior offensive line is weak, your team is weak. And the interior offensive line for Texas is elite this year, and they showed it this week.
And let's keep talking about that defense, Jake. And now there are some fun stats that you've provided for me, and I'm going to go ahead and talk about them. And then you can kind of give some more detail about it. But Michigan had 156 yards on offense before the final two drives and ended with 284. So don't let that final box score distract you as something. And then also the play from the linebackers, your top two tacklers, David Benda and Anthony Hill. Leading the team in tackles against Michigan. That's exactly the game plan that we needed to see out of the defense for them to have success. And it's not only showing in the box score, but it showed on the field as well with the results.
Yeah, I mean, we needed big games from the linebackers. We talked that before. So just, kind of the first point you brought up there is Ant Hill and Benda leading the way was huge for this defense. And I just wanted to point out those stats, not because I'm trying to make Michigan look worse than they were in the game, but I don't think the final box score reflects what a beatdown this game was. I don't think the scoreboard really reflected it completely. And it kind of plays into something I wanted to mention from Sark's presser today, which is a quote that I loved, was that he thinks this, and it is a big takeaway, I think, from this game, because while we talked about Texas coasting in the second half, I think they left some meat on the bone that they could have, even playing vanilla, could have ran up the score a little bit in this game if they played with the same level of intensity in that first half. And what Sark kind of said in his presser today was they need to get to another level with the killer instinct. And he said he wants it to be 60 minutes of hell for his opponents.
I love that.
I think I would say it was more 45 to 50 minutes of hell for Michigan, not quite 60. And even Michael Taft said it today in the player interviews. He was asked, did you give him 60 minutes of hell? And he said, we did not. And so it's nice to hear the players just being on the same page as the coach. There's no separation between what the players are saying, what the coach is saying. You feel like the program's united in how to move forward with this thing after what was an incredible performance at Michigan, but one where they're still getting these takeaways of there's still another level we can get to.
Here's the culture change. I hope this kind of puts it in a perspective for some people who are listening here and that may not be completely 100% as in tune with this program like you and I are. But say Charlie Strong era Herman era, whatever it is, if Texas had a big win like this, I mean, the players would be acting like they won a national championship. The coaching staff would say, yeah, that's exactly what we want out of our team. If we could play like that every single week, that would be great. And we would, we won't have any problems. And then the following week, they'll definitely tail off because they're just riding too high. And the difference between those programs and those teams, not to say that they didn't have the talent to perform the way this team did. Well, they didn't, but for the sake of the argument, let's go ahead and say they did. This team is not satisfied with a victory like what they just had at Michigan, and they put on one of those impressive performances in recent college football memory against the defending national champion in their home stadium 2 weeks into the next regular season following their national championship victory. I don't think there's been a team that has really done that in recent memory and then gone back in the press conference and said, you know what, we probably let off the gas a little bit. We probably shouldn't have done that. We need to finish them off and make it a clean kill shot at the end of the game.
Yeah, and to me, it shows growth even from last year. I still think the team did a good job of refocusing after Michigan. I think Wyoming was just a pretty darn good football team last year, and
I mean, and they were.
Texas just didn't play their best game, and Wyoming was tough, and they made that game scrappy and did what they wanted to. But even last year, they still, they were smoking some cigars in the locker room after the Alabama win. Granted, I think the win at Alabama was bigger than this win, but
I would agree.
I would say the reaction was much less from the players and the coaches than even the Bama game, which I didn't think they got carried away in the Bama game. It felt justified for the moment, but to me, it just continues to show the growth of, okay, last year was hey, we're a real program now. We're an actual contender now. And now this year we know we're a contender. We're going to continue to show you every week is the point where I hope that they have reached.
It went from the realization of, oh shoot, we're a good football program, to the expectation of, we expected this going into this, and we're gonna. It's like scoring a touchdown. Act like you've been there before. This is really exciting. This is really cool. This is the realization of, oh snap, we're doing this. To this year, yeah, been there, done that. This is nothing new for us. We expect this each and every week. And I think that is the maturity and the focus that Sark and this coaching staff has instilled in the leadership provided by some of the veteran players like that offensive line and Quinn.
Yeah. And, Sark says it a lot. This is a term I think any Texas fan is going to be familiar with, but I love it. And it goes to everything we're saying, which is the standard is the standard. And he talked about it a lot today at the presser about he lets the team set what the standard is, and then it's his job to push them to set a higher standard every single day so that there's a new standard to hold the team to.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, that's coach speak to a point, but I'd say he's proved it at this point that is what this program strives for. May not always reach it. There's some bumps in the road. It's probably not always going to be perfect. They may struggle in some games this year. They shouldn't. But it just feels like the program culturally, talent wise and coaching staff wise is obviously in the best spot it's been since Mac Brown, but it's also just enjoyable as a fan. There is no Herman piss test.
Yeah.
There is no Texas is soft. I don't think anyone with eyes thinks Texas is soft anymore.
No.
They are a physical football team. Just watching the culture shift from things that were not fun for 10 to 15 years.
No, it was not a good time.
The complete transformation to what we know Texas can be. It's just been a joy to watch, especially under someone like Sarkisian, that I think is the perfect representative of the University of Texas.
So 2 more things I really want to touch on before we get out of here. We've got about 9.5 minutes before that happens. So Jake, there's a certain freshman, 5-star freshman, who has been just playing big minutes. You've got some pretty cool stats for him, and kind of also a little bit of a talking point in terms of why those stats exist, and maybe he could maybe get a little bit of help from some of his teammates. Go ahead and talk about your boy, Collin Simmons.
Yeah, I said it after Saturday's win, and that was before second watch. I'm more impressed after second watch. But after the live game, I said Texas has their Wardaddy pass rusher. And after second watch, oh boy, do they. I mean, this guy's going to be a top 10 pick in the NFL as long as he stays healthy, if not top 5. I mean, he has the type of potential to be like a top 5 type pick in the draft. Collin Simmons, he had the only sack of the game, only sack of the season so far. Kind of a weird stat for a team that has put a lot of pressure on the opposing QBs. But he had 6 pressures in that Michigan game, leading the way. He leads the way on the season with pressures with 7. And if you just watch him against the run, against the pass, he's dropped off in coverage a couple times in each game. He's not only pass rushing at an elite level, he is also doing run stopping at an elite level. He's covered pretty darn well, as we saw in the Colorado State game, making a great open field tackle. He also leads the team in pressure rate with a 33.3% win rate, which, if you don't know, that may sound low. Try to think in baseball terms. That is extremely good, especially true for a true freshman that recorded almost all of his pressures on the season in the Michigan game. He played better against Michigan than he did against Colorado State.
So I can only imagine going from Michigan to now UTSA and then UL Monroe as to what we could possibly be seeing for the final 2 non-conference games before that SEC those SEC games start hitting. Now, Jake, I do want to talk about that is being a true freshman. He was a senior in high school last year. He was playing high school football a season ago. Now, what would you like to see, not just from him, but maybe his fellow pass rushers, his fellow edge rushers, fellow interior linemen getting pressure? He has recorded the only sack of the season for the Texas Longhorns, and we're about to go into week 3. So is it maybe a little bit pause for concern if the pressure doesn't start resulting in sacks?
It's going to result in sacks. I'll be honest, I'm just not worried about this. Teams have had Colorado State and Michigan. I've seen a lot of complaining about this. Ridiculous that we've been so bad for over a decade and fans are pissed off after a win against a top 10 team on the road that Michigan was never even competitive in. And
you only got 1 sack against the run-heavy Michigan Wolverines, and they threw the ball 10 times with a quarterback, those were on 2-step drops.
And so you went against Colorado State, who heavily ran the ball, and when they didn't run the ball, it was one step, 2-step throw. The QB was not taking 3 seconds. If we had seen Colorado State and Michigan, just the quarterback drop back and just be able to sit in the pocket comfortably, I would sing a different tune. Davis Warren was running for his life. He had linemen getting put on their behinds consistently throughout the game. We saw Trey Moore get several pressures. Also, go back, look at those interceptions. What do you think? Davis Warren can't just not throw a football. If he was just sitting back there in the pocket, I promise you, he doesn't throw some of those interceptions.
The dude has been on the team for 4 years now. He's a senior. He's had a lot of reps in practice, and if he wasn't capable of throwing a football relatively efficiently in the eyes of the Michigan Wolverine coaching staff, he probably wouldn't be starting, nor would he be on the team anymore. So he knows how to play football to at least a decent extent. You don't make those mistakes by just sitting comfortably and letting having no pressure in your face whatsoever.
No. And if you look at it, that the one thing I would complain about is they got there 3 or 4 times and just missed it. Just missed the tackle. Either tried to go at his legs and Warren was able to elude. I was actually very impressed. Well, as bad as Warren was, he was very impressive at getting outside of the pocket. Sark actually mentioned that today at the presser as well. He was very impressed. He was surprised at Warren's ability to escape the pocket. And that's actually where pretty much any of their positive plays passing the ball were Warren escaping out of the pocket, breaking a sack, and then getting a play downfield after the fact.
And maybe that's something that Michigan looks at and can take away as a positive and say, you know what, maybe from here on out, it's play action, roll out, get this guy moving, get him to sideline, extending the pocket with his legs, and maybe just these short intermediate passing games. Some quarterbacks thrive under being able to move outside the pocket on a designed rollout.
They're trying to treat him like he's JJ McCarthy, and he's not. I'm not saying he's Vince Young, but I'm saying he's almost like a younger Kirk Cousins, but not as good, obviously, as far as just, Kirk Cousins was really good at the rollouts when he was younger. He would, play action roll out. They'd have some sprint outs to the right, just get him on the move, sees the field a little bit better. You don't have the offensive line quite as much in front of you, making things harder to see. That is a point for Michigan. I think they could do is just get them on the move and do those short to intermediate passes. That was really the only success they had. But tying it back into what we're talking about with the pass rush, that would just be the one thing is I would like to see them just convert when they get the sack opportunities, but the pressure is better than last year. I would rather have 10 pressures and no sacks in a game than have 1 pressure and 1 sack.
Sure. Yeah. Or at least have, you have 2 or 3 sacks, but you only got those 2 or 3 pressures the entire game. And the quarterback was just sitting back there the majority of the game, just hitting receivers left and right. Whereas now you're making the quarterback uncomfortable the entirety of the game. Maybe you're not finishing it with a sack, but you're affecting the game in a much more efficient way in terms of rushing the passer and forcing turnovers, forcing mistakes, forcing incomplete passes. And quite honestly, it just becomes the Brett Favre bounty gate situation where you're feeling that pressure at all times and you're just trying to get rid of the ball.
And I do kind of have a hot take to go with the edges.
All right.
Upon second watch, I would like to see Trey Moore more often as a 3rd down or 2nd down and long passing situation player. I think it's crazy not to have Ethan Burke out there on 1st down when they're running it. After my second watch and kind of looking at some of the metrics that have come out from the game, Ethan Burke is just far more efficient than Trey Moore is right now, especially against the run. Moore's actually the lowest graded edge on the team against runs. Per PFF. Not that PFF is the most reliable, but it can give you a gauge.
It's a measure. It's a measuring stick. So Jake, let's go ahead and let's end on this. We've got a couple minutes left, and I wanted to talk about something that Sark said in his presser before we get too far into the weeds. He said that the turning point for Quinn, in Sark's opinion, was that the Oklahoma State game from Quinn's freshman season, where he went 19 of 49, threw for 2 touchdowns and 3 interceptions. It was an ugly game. I remember it vividly. It was a very windy game. It was a very ugly game. There were I think that was the game Texas had like 30 penalties and Oklahoma State had 0, if I'm not mistaken. It was a god-awful performance by the officials and for the Texas Longhorns. But Sark's comments today saying that was a real turning point. He saw a lot out of Quinn after that game. Do you want to elaborate on any of that?
Yeah, what he was kind of talking about there, and he expanded on a little bit, was that was a game where I think Quinn, he was a perfect recruit coming out of high school, got signed a huge NIL. And by perfect recruit, I mean he had a perfect rating. Him, Arch Manning, and Vince Young and Trevor Lawrence are the only QBs to ever have that coming out of high school. And he had to kind of look in the mirror after that game because he realized that game was mostly on him. And Sark just felt that was a moment where he looked in the mirror and realized, I don't like this feeling of losing. I am a competitive person. And if I don't want to feel this feeling again, I have to be better individually. And it was a moment that kind of pushed him to not only become a better quarterback on the field, but also I think that was when he realized he needed to be a little bit more of a leader, because that was definitely not a strength of his coming in. He's had to grow into being a leader. He is not a natural leader when it comes to the verbal side of things and things you kind of have to do as a quarterback.
Yeah, and I think it just is something that Sark is meaning to overcome adversity and to come out on the better side of it. Every player in college football, every quarterback faces adversity at some point or another in their playing career. It's whether or not you're going to grow from it and become the player that you are, that everybody says you are, or are you going to let it tear you down and it's going to affect you for the rest of your football career? And we've seen it go either way, and so I think that to me is something that it was more of a mental thing of like, look, after this game, it's going to go one of two ways for you, buddy. You can either take this road or you can take that road. And, Quinn chose the road that he's on now. And I think that's kind of the point where Sark is talking about, where he had the long, hard look in the mirror at himself, and he had to figure that out himself. There's nothing Sark could do at that moment. It was kind of a do-it-yourself moment for Quinn, and he did it.
Yeah, you can either blame your offensive line for losing you the game, or you can try to look at how you can get better.
Yeah, you can either tell the band to stop playing the fight song and play your own rap song, or you can.
That story came out to be fake. It did come out that that story
Okay,
was fake.
all right.
However,
Well,
it was believable, which says a
isn't
lot
that
about where that
wild?
program's at.
That's where that tells you everything you need to know about that program. All right, well, Jake, that does it for our 30 minutes here for this beautiful Tuesday afternoon. Let's go ahead and recoup tomorrow. We've got more Longhorn talk for you all week long as we lead up to the big game against UTSA. This is All in Horns on Rogue Sports Network. Hook 'em.
All in Sports Network. We love sports.